They say that children choose their parents, they choose which family to be born into. If that's true, then I made the biggest mistake of my life when I chose mine. At school, I was a math genius. Numbers made sense when nothing else did. Equations whispered secrets that no one else could hear. Teachers called me the boy who could see through numbers. But at home I was nothing. A loser. A mistake my parents wished they hadn't made. My parents wouldn't give me dinner unless I cleaned the stables and fed the horses. I still remember the icy air of Nebraska winters, the sting in my fingers as I carried buckets of water, the smell of manure that clung to my clothes long after I'd washed them. It wasn't that we were poor, though we were, it was that they didn't care. About me, about my dreams, about anything but the farm. Books won't feed the horses. My father used to spit, his breath always reeking of cheap whiskey. You'll never be anything more than a farmhand. Stop wasting your time with numbers. If you're listening to this, subscribe to my channel and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let go of the one thing that made me feel alive. So I studied in secret, in the hayloft, in the cornfields, even in the bathroom with the door locked. I solved equations on scraps of feed sacks and hid them under my mattress like contraband. I think the first person who truly saw me was Mr. Keller, my school principal. He was this tall, gray-haired man with sad eyes, the kind that carried other people's pain. He'd find me in the library late at night and bring me sandwiches when he knew I hadn't eaten. "You're special, kid," he told me once. "And special kids have to fight harder." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But when I got home, my father was waiting with a belt in his hand. My mother stood in the corner, silent as always, eyes glued to the floor. The beatings weren't the worst part. The worst part was the words. "You're worthless. You'll never make it. You're not one of us." Sometimes I believed him. When I turned 16, something broke inside me. I stopped waiting for him to love me. I stopped wishing for my mother to defend me. I made a decision. I'd get out. So I doubled down. Every spare second went into schoolwork. Every quiz was perfect, every exam flawless. I became obsessed, addicted to the idea that my brain was my ticket out. By the time I graduated, I was valedictorian. I still remember the look on my father's face when I walked across that stage in my cheap suit and borrowed shoes. He didn't clap. He didn't smile. He just sat there with his arms crossed, as if my success was an insult to him. After the ceremony, he cornered me behind the gym. "You're coming back to work the farm," he said flatly. "No," I told him, my voice shaking but steady. "I'm going to college." He laughed in my face. "You? College? You think some fancy school wants a horse boy? You'll be back here in a year, begging for a job." He was wrong. I'd already been accepted to an Ivy League university, full scholarship. When I told him, he spat at my feet. "If you leave, you're no son of mine." And just like that, at 18, I was disowned. Life in the Ivy League wasn't glamorous. Not for me. While other kids drove Teslas and wore $1,000 jackets, I scrubbed dishes in a restaurant just to afford toothpaste. My scholarship covered tuition, but food, rent, books, that was on me. There were nights I fell asleep on the library floor, my stomach twisting with hunger. Days I walked across campus in shoes with holes because I couldn't afford new ones. But I didn't care. Every struggle was proof that I was choosing my own life. One professor in particular, Dr. Morrison, became the closest thing I'd ever had to a father. He was patient, brilliant, and genuinely kind. When he saw me falling asleep in class one day, he didn't scold me. He invited me to his office. "Let me guess," he said with a smile. "2 jobs, no sleep?" I nodded. "You're going to burn out," he warned. "Let me help you." And he did. He became my mentor, my compass. He believed in me when no one else ever had. 4 years later, I graduated at the top of my class. Then came grad school, then research, and eventually, I landed a job at one of the biggest IT firms in the country. 8 years after leaving home, I was no longer the poor farm boy my father mocked. I was a lead programmer, a man the industry quietly called a genius. But my parents never called. Not once. And yet, Even as I stood on the edge of everything I'd ever dreamed of, I still carried the weight of that farm, that belt, those words. I thought I'd buried my past. I thought wrong. Because 12 years after I'd left home, my father came looking for me. And that's where everything began again. It had been 12 years since I'd last seen my father. 12 years since the night I walked out of that farmhouse with nothing but a duffel bag and a scholarship letter in my pocket. In those 12 years, I built a life. A real one. I lived in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, worked with some of the brightest minds in tech, and ran teams that shaped the future of AI. I had friends. I had respect. I had freedom. And yet, when I opened the door that day and saw him standing there, the same knot of fear coiled in my stomach, just like when I was a boy. He looked older, smaller somehow. His once broad shoulders had caved in, and his skin was worn and sunken from years of alcohol and hard labor. But his eyes hadn't changed. Still sharp, still cold, still full of that same entitlement. "Hello, son," he said, as if the word didn't taste bitter on his tongue. I stood there, frozen, gripping the edge of the doorframe. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, that crooked, mocking smile I knew too well. "Can't a father visit his boy?" "No." I stepped aside, blocking the doorway. "Not this father. Not this boy." For a moment I thought he'd leave, but he didn't. Instead, he shoved his hands into his worn jacket and sighed. "Fine. I'll get to the point. I need money." There it was. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years he'd ignored me. No, "How have you been?" Just need. "How much?" I asked, my voice flat. 500,000, he said without blinking. "I want to rebuild the stables, buy new horses, make the farm great again." I laughed, sharp, bitter, ugly. "You came here after 12 years because you want $500,000 for horses?" His jaw tightened. "I figured you'd be grateful I even came to you. You're rich now, aren't you? I saw you on the news. Big shot CEO. Big penthouse. Big life. You can spare it." I stared at him, my pulse pounding in my ears. Images from childhood flooded back. His drunken rages, the belt, the nights I slept in the cornfields just to stay out of his reach. "Do you remember?" I said quietly. "How you used to call me a failure? How you'd come home drunk and beat me because I wasn't strong enough? Do you remember the night I hid in the fields because I thought you'd kill me?" For a split second, guilt flickered in his eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone. "That was the past," he muttered. "I was hard on you because I wanted you to be a man." I shook my head slowly. "No, you were hard on me because you hated what you didn't understand." I stepped back and started to close the door. "You're not getting a dime." His voice rose, sharp and venomous. "You think you're better than us now, huh? Some big city genius who forgot where he came from?" "No," I said softly, staring straight into his eyes. "I remember exactly where I came from. That's why I'll never go back." And then I closed the door. I thought that would be the end of it. But I should have known better. A month later, he came back. This time, he didn't ask for money for horses. He asked for money for treatment. Claimed he had cancer. I didn't believe him, but I agreed to look at his medical records. Turned out he wasn't lying about the illness, but he was lying about the costs. His insurance covered almost everything. When I told him, he exploded. "You've got millions, and you're gonna let your old man suffer? You stopped being my father the day you disowned me," I said coldly. That's when he saw the vase. A hand-blown Italian piece, worth more than his entire truck. He grabbed it off the table and hurled it at the wall, shattering it into 100 glittering pieces. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I didn't hide in the cornfields this time. I pressed a button on the wall panel. 2 security guards appeared within seconds. "Escort Mr. Thompson out," I said calmly, "and make sure he never steps foot in this building again." As they dragged him toward the elevator, he turned his head and spat out words meant to wound me. "You'll regret this. You'll regret turning your back on family. But here's the thing, you can't regret something you never had." After that day, I didn't hear from him again. Not a call. Not an email. Not a word. I poured myself into work, built things that mattered, built things that would outlive me. And when my book came out, my diary, my story, my truth, I told the world everything. The beatings, the neglect, the silence, the nights alone in the fields. People called it brave. They said I was inspiring. But deep down, it wasn't about bravery. It was about finally being heard. And then, 6 months later, the phone rang. It was my sister. Dad was dead. That was the moment I realized the past never really lets you go. And as I'd soon learn, my father had one final surprise waiting for me. I hadn't set foot in my hometown for 12 years. As the black SUV rolled past the endless stretches of cornfields, I felt like I was driving straight into a memory I'd spent half my life trying to erase. The same peeling billboards, the same rusted water tower with the town's name barely legible, the same dirt roads I used to run down as a boy, barefoot and bruised. The funeral was held at the old Baptist church, the one where my mother used to drag me on Sundays while my father nursed his hangovers in the truck outside. As I walked up the steps, people stared. Some whispered, others pointed. I knew what they were thinking. That's him, the farm boy who made it big, the one who abandoned his family. Inside, my siblings sat together in the front row, avoiding my gaze. Emily, my older sister, looked like she'd aged 20 years since I last saw her. Mark, the eldest brother, had the same hard jawline as my father, and the same resentful eyes. And then there was Lily, the youngest, who barely remembered me. She gave me a polite nod, nothing more. When I sat down, Mark leaned over, his voice low and sharp. "You don't belong here." I met his glare. Maybe not. But neither did he belong in my life. Before he could reply, the pastor began speaking. I thought I'd feel something when they lowered my father into the ground. Anger, sadness, relief, anything. But all I felt was empty. After the service, the lawyer announced that the reading of the will would take place that evening at my father's house. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to get on a plane, fly back to New York, and never look back. But something in me needed closure. That night, we gathered around the dining table I'd eaten at as a child, the one where I'd been forced to finish cold dinners long after everyone else had left. The air was thick with tension, and no one spoke. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. 6 months ago, Mr. Thompson amended his will. Emily frowned. "What do you mean, amended?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses and read on. "To my daughters Emily and Lily, and to my son Mark, I leave each of you your choice of the best riding horse from the farm. Everything else, the land, the stables, the equipment, and all remaining assets, I leave to my son David Thompson." The room went silent. I froze. Took me a second to realize he was talking about me. Mark shot out of his chair, his face flushed red. "This is a joke," he barked. He hated David. He said it himself. He disowned him. The lawyer hesitated, then reached for a remote control. "There's something else," he said quietly. "A video message." The flat-screen TV came alive, and there he was. My father, looking frail, his skin pale and stretched. "David," he began, his voice rough but steady. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. I don't expect forgiveness. God knows I don't deserve it." I felt my throat tighten. "You were always different," he continued. "Smarter, braver. I couldn't handle it. I thought tearing you down would make you stay. I thought breaking you would keep you close. But you left, and you were right to leave." He coughed, wiped his mouth, then looked straight into the camera. "This farm, it's dying. I can't save it. None of your brothers or sisters can save it. But you built something from nothing. You made it. And maybe, just maybe, you're the only one who can make this place live again. So I'm leaving it to you." He paused, breathing heavily. "I know your siblings will hate me for this. I know they'll think I loved you more. But the truth is, I always loved you the most. I just didn't know how to show it." The screen went black. For a long time, nobody said anything. You could hear the creak of the ceiling fan, the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then Mark slammed his fist on the table. "You don't get it," he growled. "You don't deserve it. You left us. You abandoned the farm. I looked at him, my voice calm but cold. I didn't abandon the farm, Mark. I escaped it. Emily started crying quietly. Lily just stared at her hands. I stood up, suddenly exhausted. You can have the farm, I said. All of it. I don't want it. Mark sneered. Then why come back? Because, I said softly. I needed to hear him say it. I walked out of that house without another word. The next day, I went to visit my parents' grave. I stood there for a long time, staring at the freshly turned soil, not knowing whether to be angry or relieved. And that's when I heard a voice behind me. Well, I'll be damned, the voice said. David Thompson. I turned, and there he was, Mr. Keller, my old principal, my first real mentor. His hair was gray now, his posture bent, his left leg dragging slightly. But his eyes were the same. You came back, he said, smiling softly. I nodded. I guess I did. He sighed. The school's not what it used to be. Teachers are leaving. Kids got nowhere to go. We're on the edge of shutting down. And that's when something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I thought of that lonely boy in the hayloft, solving equations on scraps of paper. Maybe it was time to give another kid a chance to escape. I drove past the farm the next morning. The old wooden fence was splintered and broken in places. The once proud red barn had lost half its paint, and the roof sagged under years of neglect. The stables where I'd once shoveled manure until my hands bled now stood empty, their doors hanging crooked like broken teeth. It should have felt like justice. Instead, it felt like grief. This place had been my prison, my cage, my battlefield, but it had also been my beginning. I parked the car and stood by the fence for a long time, staring at the land my father had given me with his dying breath. The land I'd spent a lifetime trying to escape. David! I turned. Emily was standing there, wrapped in a faded sweater, holding a thermos of coffee. She looked tired, older than her 40 years. I thought you'd already gone back to New York, she said. I almost did, I admitted. She hesitated, then offered me the thermos. I know Mark's been angry, but he doesn't hate you, David. He hates himself. He stayed. You left. And now, well, you made it. I took a sip of the coffee, bitter and lukewarm, and studied my sister's face. For the first time, I realized she'd carried burdens I'd never seen. You don't want the farm, do you? I asked. She shook her head. I wanted freedom too, she whispered. I just never found the courage to take it. That afternoon, I drove to the school where I'd spent my childhood hiding in books and numbers. The building was in worse shape than the farm. Windows were cracked, paint peeled from the walls, and weeds grew through the cracks in the pavement. The sign out front, Hollow Creek Elementary, was barely hanging by one chain. Inside, the halls smelled of mildew and dust. Half the classrooms were empty, their desks stacked in corners like forgotten relics. I found Mr. Keller in the teacher's lounge, sitting with a mug of tea and a stack of overdue bills spread across the table. You weren't kidding, I said quietly. He looked up and smiled faintly. We're drowning, David. Kids deserve better, but we've got nothing left. Teachers keep quitting. No one wants to work here anymore. I sat across from him, fingers laced together. What if I could help? He raised an eyebrow. Help how? I took a deep breath, my mind already racing ahead. A campus, I said. Not just classrooms, a whole campus. A modern place where kids can learn coding, robotics, engineering, anything they want. Labs, computers, access to the best teachers in the state. A place where talent doesn't get buried under poverty. Mr. Keller stared at me for a long moment, his lips parting slightly, like he wasn't sure if he'd heard me right. You do that? He asked finally, his voice breaking. I nodded. I was that kid once, I said softly. Lost, hungry, invisible. Someone believed in me when nobody else did. Now it's my turn. For the first time in decades, I saw Mr. Keller's eyes fill with tears. That night, I sat alone on the back porch of the farmhouse, staring at the horizon where the cornfields touched the sky. For years, I thought leaving this place meant killing the boy I used to be. But the truth was, he'd never really died. He'd just been waiting for me to come back and finish what I'd started. My phone buzzed. Mark. I debated ignoring it, but finally answered. What do you want? I asked. You, he said bluntly, to look me in the eye and tell me you're really gonna give the farm back. Meet me tomorrow, I said. By the stables. The next morning, Mark was already there when I arrived. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight, his resentment radiating like heat. I don't understand you, he said. You ran away, built your fancy life, and now you're swooping in like some kind of hero. Why didn't you ever call? Why didn't you ever come back? I swallowed hard. There were no easy answers. Because this place hurt too much, I said finally. Because every time I thought of home, I remembered the belt, the yelling, the nights I spent hiding in the fields. I didn't come back because I didn't want to feel like that boy again. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, slowly, Mark's expression softened, just slightly. You really don't want the farm? He asked. I shook my head. It was never mine, I said quietly. It was always yours. I pulled a folder from my jacket, legal documents, transferring full ownership of the farm to him. But I'll do one thing, I added. I'll fund the restoration. New stables, new horses, everything Dad wanted, but this time you'll run it your way. Mark stared at the papers like he didn't believe what he was seeing. Why? He whispered. Because, I said softly, I don't want his legacy, but I also don't want his dream to die. For the first time since I'd come back, Mark looked at me without anger. Maybe, he said slowly, you're not such a city boy after all. That night, as I lay in my childhood bed, I realized something profound. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my father wrong. But maybe it was time to start proving myself right. The farm would live. The school would rise. And maybe, just maybe, the boy who once hid in the cornfields could finally come home. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running anymore. The next few months were a blur of plans, meetings, and decisions. The farm restoration began, new stables, solar panels, state-of-the-art feeding systems. Mark threw himself into it with a passion I'd never seen in him before. Watching him work, I finally understood. This land was his heartbeat. Meanwhile, the school project took shape. I hired a team of architects and engineers, secured permits, and began designing a modern learning campus on the very grounds where I once sat solving math problems on scraps of feed sacks. Mr. Keller became my partner in this. He brought in teachers from across the state, people who believed in giving rural kids the opportunities we never had. For the first time, Hollow Creek felt alive again. And yet, amid all the rebuilding, something gnawed at me. The night before I signed the final funding contracts, I received a letter. No return address, no signature, just a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. Your father wasn't the man you thought he was. Inside the envelope was an old photograph. My father standing in front of the barn, his arm around a boy I didn't recognize. On the back, a date, August 1993. I turned the photo over in my hands again and again. My father looked younger, happier. The boy, maybe 12 or 13, had his same square jaw, his same piercing eyes. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I drove to see Emily. You ever seen this kid? I asked, sliding the photo across her kitchen table. Her face went pale. Where did you get this? You know him? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. His name was Ethan, she whispered. Dad's son. From before Mom. I stared at her, my stomach churning. You're telling me we have a half-brother? Emily nodded again, tears welling in her eyes. He lived here for a while. Mom hated him, said he was a mistake. Dad sent him away one summer, said it was for the best. We never saw him again. Why didn't anyone tell me? I demanded. Because you were a kid, Emily said softly. And because we thought he was dead. That night, I dug through my father's old desk, searching for answers. Most of the drawers were filled with unpaid bills and yellowed receipts. But in the bottom drawer, Hidden under a false panel, I found a stack of letters bound with twine. They were from Ethan. Dozens of them. Dad, why don't you write back? I miss the farm. I miss you. They said you don't want me anymore. Is it true? The last letter was dated 10 years ago. I'm in trouble. Please, I need you. There was no reply. Couldn't breathe. I went to see Mark the next day, the photo and letters in hand. He stared at them, his jaw tight, fists clenched. Damn it, he muttered. I told him to tell you. I told him Ethan deserved better. Where is he, Mark? I asked, my voice low. Mark shook his head. No one knows. Dad cut him off completely. Sent him to live with some relatives in Kansas. After that, Ethan disappeared. I leaned back, heart pounding. My father, the man who'd beaten me, belittled me, disowned me, had carried another secret shame all these years. A son he abandoned, just like he tried to abandon me. That night, I sat by the stables, staring at the rebuilt fences and gleaming new stalls, listening to the horses breathe in the quiet darkness. For the first time in months, I felt the old anger boiling again. All my life, I thought I knew the story. I thought I understood my father's cruelty, his silence, his choices. But this was something different. If Ethan was alive, where was he now? Did he know Dad was dead? Did he know the farm had been left to me? And most importantly, was I repeating the same cycle of abandonment without even realizing it? The next day, I called a private investigator. I need you to find someone, I said. The PI hesitated. Name? Ethan Keller, I said softly, glancing at the photo again. Yes, Keller. My old principal's surname. That's when it hit me like a punch. Ethan wasn't just my half-brother. He was Mr. Keller's grandson. Suddenly, everything felt connected. Weeks passed. The farm blossomed. Construction crews broke ground on the new campus. The town began whispering about the boy who came back and saved Hollow Creek. But every night, I stared at that photo. I thought I'd buried my past. Turns out my past wasn't done with me. One evening, my investigator called. I found him, he said. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Where? Not far, he said. And, David, you're not going to like what you find. I drove 3 hours to meet Ethan. The private investigator had given me an address, a small rehabilitation center on the outskirts of Wichita. The place looked tired, its sign faded, its parking lot cracked and overgrown with weeds. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. A nurse led me down a hallway lined with peeling wallpaper until we stopped in front of a door marked room 214. He's had a hard life, she said gently. Be patient with him. I nodded and stepped inside. Ethan sat by the window, thin and pale, his hair dark and unkempt. He couldn't have been more than 35, but his face carried the weight of 50 years. He didn't look up when I walked in. You're late, he said flatly, his voice raspy. I froze. You know who I am? He finally turned his head and met my eyes, and in that moment, I saw my father staring back at me. Same jawline, same piercing gaze. I know, he said quietly. I've known about you my whole life. The golden son, the one he chose. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding. That's not how it was, I said softly. He disowned me. He wanted me to stay and work the farm, and when I left, he cut me out. Ethan laughed bitterly. Yeah? At least he gave you a choice. I hesitated. What happened to you, Ethan? He stared out the window for a long moment before answering. When Mom left him, he dumped me like trash, sent me to relatives who didn't want me, then stopped calling altogether. I bounced through foster homes, group homes, juvenile detention. By 17, I was on my own. Drugs, theft, anything to survive. And while I was out there sinking, he was back here building a new family. With you in it. I swallowed hard, guilt gnawing at me even though none of it had been my fault. I didn't know, I whispered. Ethan turned back to me, his eyes sharp. Yeah, and that's the problem, isn't it? None of you ever knew. None of you ever cared. I sat there in silence, feeling the weight of all the years we'd both lost. Finally, I reached into my bag and pulled out the photograph, the one of him and Dad, taken all those years ago. He stared at it for a long time, his hands trembling. "I kept it," I said softly, "because it's proof. Proof that he loved you once." Ethan laughed. Not bitter this time, but hollow, tired. "Love?" he said, shaking his head. "If that was love, I'd hate to see what hate looked like." We talked for hours. About him, about me, about the man who had failed us both in different ways. When I told him about the farm, his face hardened. "He left it to you?" "Yes," I said carefully, "but I've already given it to Mark. I don't want it." He stared at me, searching my face for signs of deceit. "And the money?" "I don't want that either," I said. "But I want you to have something, a place to heal, a fresh start, if you want it." For the first time since I walked in, Ethan's eyes softened. 2 months later, Hollow Creek was buzzing. The farm restoration was complete. The new stables shone in the sunlight, filled with strong, healthy horses. Mark ran the place with pride. Emily managed the finances, and Lily, sweet Lily, finally learned to ride the way she'd always dreamed as a child. But the real heart of the change stood on the other side of town, the Hollow Creek Learning Campus. It opened with brand new classrooms, tech labs, and dormitories for students who had nowhere else to go. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew crowds from across the county. Kids ran laughing across the fields where I once hid as a boy, clutching new laptops, talking about futures they could finally imagine. And standing beside me that day, leaning slightly on a cane, was Mr. Keller. He smiled at me, his proud, lined face glowing. "You did it, David," he whispered. "You broke the cycle." I smiled faintly. "No," I said softly, glancing at Ethan, who stood a few feet away, helping set up tables for the celebration. "We did it." That night, after everyone left, I walked alone through the quiet school halls. In one of the new classrooms, the whiteboard was filled with equations, neat, precise, beautiful. For a moment, I saw myself sitting there at 12 years old, scribbling numbers on scraps of paper in secret, terrified that my father would find me and call me useless again. I smiled at that boy. "You made it," I whispered. Before leaving town, I visited my parents' grave one last time. I stood there in silence, the wind rustling through the trees, and placed the old photograph on the gravestone, the one of my father and Ethan. "You broke us," I said quietly, "but we put ourselves back together." I turned to leave, but a thought stopped me. I looked back at the stone and whispered, "I forgive you." For the first time in my life, I meant it. As I drove away from Hollow Creek, the town shrinking in the rearview mirror, I realized something profound. I had spent my whole life trying to escape my story, but maybe the only way to truly be free was to rewrite it. And that's exactly what I'd done. A year later, the Hollow Creek Learning Campus ranked among the top rural education programs in the state. Kids who once had no future were being accepted into Ivy League schools. Ethan came to work there full-time, mentoring students who'd grown up just like him, lost, forgotten, angry. The farm thrived under Mark's care, becoming the largest supplier of organic horse feed in the county. And me? I went back to New York, but I wasn't the same man who'd left, because Hollow Creek wasn't just my past anymore. It was my redemption.